Hello there, and welcome to our second deep dive session at Beyond. And today we are deep diving into Current Rising, which is a forthcoming production from Figment and the Royal Opera House Audience Lab. So I'm joined by Simon Revley from Figment Productions and Annette Mace from the Royal Opera House. And the first thing I'd like to ask you two is, how did you meet? How did you come across each other?
Do you want to tell that story, Annette, or shall I?
I think, when I started at the Royal Opera House, one of the things that I was really excited about, I was setting up the audience labs, and my job was to really look at different technologies and how we could make great art with it. So one of the things I was really excited about is the idea of people being able to step into an operatic world. So many people said, you should meet Simon Revley. He's doing extraordinary things with hyperreality. So I went over, saw some dinosaurs, stepped into some of the worlds Simon was building, and absolutely loved it. And it felt to me, as a technology and sort of the way Figment works, it felt very operatic. It felt like the kind of universe you could step into and just experience something that is nothing to do with naturalism and everything to do with imagination. So for me, technology-wise, it was love at first sight, and then talking to Simon and his team, it just felt like we could do something really special together.
And it was lovely to get an angle on what we were doing that was so different from the day-to-day commercial work that we do, because as Annette said, when she came over with the team from the Opera House, we put them into a world of dinosaurs where they would stand on a valley overlooking these huge Patago Titan dinosaurs that would stomp around below them. And obviously this is a million miles away from what you would tend to expect to see at the Royal Opera House. And our background is working with both corporate clients, but also theme parks, museums, visitor attractions. So we're very much at the commercial end of things, and to work with an arts organisation, such an illustrious one as the Opera House, was such a brilliant opportunity. And initially we just thought the challenge would be really interesting, to take one of the oldest art forms and pair it with one of the newest, and that could come with some interesting challenges, particularly as we were looking at what tools we might need to develop to make this kind of work more efficiently. So that really opened the door to all sorts of really interesting questions. But I think I certainly didn't realize initially just what a good fit it was, because opera is hyperreality in its own right. You know, it does deal with universal themes, but it does it in a way that is quite otherworldly often. And that's not really something I'd thought about too much until Annette and I met and we started to talk about what we could do together.
Okay, so you had this dialogue together, but this started out as a kind of R&D project, I suppose. You know, that was one of the things that started, then called Hyphen, I guess, which was but had hyperreality at the heart of it. So what were the questions that, it sounds like you've got very different questions that you were trying to ask, and now you're thinking about how opera translates into this medium, and Simon thinking also about production tools as well as end product.
Yeah, well, interestingly, our connection actually originated from tools. I mean, Figment is a production company. We usually make content for people. That's at the heart of what we do. But we've also always worked with a range of interesting technologies. And so we've always paired the content production with the delivery of that content. But actually, when we met the Royal Opera House initially, and this was before Annette and I were introduced to each other, we did a little project with the production team at the Opera House to use Microsoft HoloLens mixed reality headsets to actually visualize set automation. So if you've ever been lucky enough to stand on the stage at the Opera House, you will see this absolutely cavernous space, which most people don't realize it is, but it's huge. And all of this set work is actually kept back from the stage, and it has to be physically moved, and a lot of it is huge. So it gets moved around on these giant automated on this giant automated machinery, and that gets programmed via a lighting desk. So we'd done an R&D project with the Opera House production team to visualize what was going to happen when they programmed the movement of the set. So it was quite a small project, but it was really fun, and it was really interesting use of immersive technologies to actually look at real world productions. So that happened before Annette and I met, and then obviously we started to talk about actually creating something, creating an original piece. And it fitted really well for us because we'd seen that the second stream of the Audience of the Future funding was focused on tools and tool sets. And we had this very great need for the platform that we'd originally built, which was a hyper-reality multi-user experience where 4 to 6 people put on a VR headset, a backpack PC, and then they get to walk around a real space together. They see each other as avatars. They can interact with the world physically. There are 4D effects like wind and rumble. And there's not many people in the world who do this kind of work. And it brings its own unique challenges in terms of how you design and produce the content for those experiences, because it's no longer just a bunch of CGI work with some sound effects. This is very different. And the commercial model of how these things function it is a bit like theatre, in that you need an audience of a certain size to go through that experience regularly enough that you're going to make money from tickets and that it's going to become commercially viable as a business. So we were interested in looking at that whole path from designing the experience, making sure it was commercially viable, and then working with external creative teams to actually develop this very new type of art form. And so it was that focus on building this tool set, which was and still is called Hyphen. It's the bit that joins together the creative production world with this very technical world of hyperreality. So we call that system Hyphen. That's been the thrust of the technical side of the project. But hand in hand with that, we needed a test project. We needed a genuine real world test, because that's the only time when you really figure out the tools that you really do need. You know, when we started the project, we had a very long technical specification of the things we thought we needed. And very quickly that got torn up and reassessed for a number of reasons. I'm sure we'll come to some of the more recent reasons in a little while in the conversation. But initially the challenge was, how do we take people from a very different world of art and culture and work with them to create the best possible experience within the context of this completely new art form of hyperreality?
Yeah. And I think the same was true for us to a certain extent. It's the same, but the inverse. Sort of when we talk about opera, there is a word, a Wagnerian word called Gesamtkunstwerk. It means sort of all the art forms together, total art. So for us, how you make opera within hyperreality, how do we use that to expand what opera can be, what a 21st century Gesamtkunstwerk looks like, how that affects the process of creation, what that opens up musically and visually and storytelling wise. It's a whole new way of creating and a whole new way of shifting hierarchies, production modes, and therefore the artistry, which is very exciting.
I think it's absolutely fantastic that we've got a German compound noun into this discussion at this very, very early stage, talking about opera.
I'm here for that.
The one thing immediately that comes from that, I mean, taking that point of the Gesamtkunstwerk on, is actually, Simon, you already talked about a tool set that you were building around, I suppose, what we now think of as Sixtoff, untethered, but also multi-experience. So that presumably becomes very important in that to how you deliver this, because you couldn't deliver this in static VR in some ways, that kind of all-embracing experience that you were describing there.
Yeah, I think for me, what was really exciting is that Gesamt, that total, that embodied experience, which just felt really exciting for us to explore as an opera project. I think that the idea that we could subvert the laws of physics within the experience, that we could genuinely let people step into a universe where we could shift and change the environment as well as the music, the idea that we could compose music that is there to be stepped into, so it's three-dimensionally. I think all of those things really spoke to the imagination of us at the Royal Opera House, the creative team we worked with, and for us it was always sort of bringing stagecraft and everything we do so well to this, but then being open to have that subverted by the possibilities of technology. And it felt like, I think the thing that Simon and I talked about very much at the beginning, and I hope we achieved throughout the process, is to continuously blend the technology, the possibilities of the technology with the artistic expression, and keep checking in that we were doing both and let those two things grow up together.
So can we talk a bit about the process then? So where do you start? You know, you can see, you know, you've got a whole load of assets and experience on both sides, but literally, where do you start with a project like this?
Well, it was really good fun, actually. I remember that with great fondness. Obviously, Annette and I and the really talented teams that we both work with did quite a lot of work leading up to the sort of official kickoff of the project. But I think of that as being the couple of days where we did a workshop, and we brought the creative team down, who sort of consisted of a opera director, a designer, as in, you know, but who designs the set and the look and feel of a show, and the composer, and then there was Annette and other members of her team. And it was just fantastic because we hosted them here at Figment, where we, you know, have a museum of VR headsets in one form or another, and access to lots and lots of content. So we immersed them in immersive for 2 days. We showed them everything and anything that we could, that we felt was relevant, that would essentially engage and without being patronizing about it, educate them as to what was happening in the world of VR. And so we were able to do that with a lot of relatively well-known pieces of VR content. But then, because we have our own studio space and our own hyper reality stage set up here, and at the time we've shrunk the footprint of that a little bit for various reasons that we could talk about later on. But it was a really big footprint space, and so we could have like 16 people within that space. But we put the whole group through in phases, and they did our dinosaur experience, which lasts about 15 minutes or so. And so they were able to see the full extent to what hyperreality could do. And in that experience, we have motion, we have wind effects, we have rumble and lots of things. We also, in that system, we use realistic avatars. So we actually capture how you look, scan your face, and we rebuild a digital double of you. So they were all able to play with all that. So they went from 0 at 10 o'clock in the morning on the Tuesday or whatever it was, through to the end of the Wednesday, having seen probably more VR than most people in the world have ever seen still now. So it was this real deep dive into everything and anything. And the brainstorms that came out the other end of that were just mind-blowing. It was an amazing experience to do that with them.
And that you must have known a lot, you know, you're very aware of these things, but how new to the VR experience were most of the other members on the Opera House creative team?
So some of them had never seen VR before. So when I was putting a creative team together, I wanted to bring an all-female creative team together. It's very unusual in opera to have that, and we were making an unusual opera in an unusual way. So we started from there, and it just felt like a nice thing to do. So when I started putting the team together, I worked with the opera company to identify people who would be great. And I talked to a lot of different designers, directors and composers. And the thing that I was really looking for was not experience, but excited curiosity, I think. So our director, Nisha Jones, has this long background. She was a video designer originally, and has a very visual way of thinking, and already really thinks about structurally how you deconstruct opera and do it in radical new ways. Our designer, Joe Scotcher, has done amazing work for opera and theatre, but also has done immersive theatre and the opening for the panoramic games, a stadium-sized design. So that felt a really exciting combination. And then composing-wise, we really looked for Samantha Fernando as our composer, composers who were excited about the idea that they were no longer composing for something that would come at you from an orchestra pit, but really compose a musical world. So just casting the right people who were already really excited about scale and doing things differently and being part of a journey of discovery. I think for me that was sort of the key point in bringing the right creatives on board.
So you got this really fantastic creative group together after Simon's kind of deep immersion principle. You, after 2 days, you presumably got some people who are also kind of slightly motion troubled, but very excited in all the opportunities and things. But I don't even know, I suppose, like a lot of people, what the conventional process route to develop a new opera is. So where do you go next?
So we're already in unknown territory right now, because what normally happens in opera is someone writes the music, then works with a librettist, and they sort of work together. And then when that's finished, a director comes on board and starts thinking a bit about staging. And at that point, the designer comes on board. We, from the start, inverted that because we really felt like we were going to design a world that was music driven, but a world. So already we're deviating from the normal path. So when Simon and I were designing those few days, I took to the creative team on my side and sort of go, this is why you three are coming together. And that was already mildly mind-blowing. And for us, what was really interesting is to then put our normal process next to Simon's process. And one of the things that really stayed with me was the idea of moments, which we do in theatre, but often towards the end, when you start hitting tech, you sort of go, okay, so this is the image, this is the image, this is the image, this is how we land. Simon's team often start with it. We want to do a dinosaur experience, and this is a moment we want to achieve, and this is a moment we want to achieve, and then build the experience around it. So for us, that was already a bit of process that was very recognizable, but completely on the other point. And so we adopted that, but then also subverted it in our way again. And I think, so these processes, taking the time for these processes to find their commonalities and their differences and ordering that in a different way.
It's interesting that Annette remembers those conversations about moments, because that's something that we'd developed over a period of time, which might not make a lot of sense to people, but we had, obviously, as I mentioned, come from a background working in theme parks and visitor attractions. And with hyperreality, which we were very enthusiastic to embrace after doing some large-scale VR-based projects in theme parks, we felt that there was a missed opportunity, and that opportunity was to have a shared experience and to have freedom of movement, and that those were going to be at the heart of what we do. However, commercially, one of the things that we've done, I've personally done several times, is we calculate something called THRC, which is basically the throughput, the number of people, the theoretical throughput per hour of how many people can go through a ride experience at a theme park. And the same thing counts in the world of hyperreality, because if you are going to go to a venue, you're going to buy a ticket to do an experience like this, the commercials have to add up, right? So you have to be able to say, well, we're going to be able to do X number of people an hour. That's going to generate Y in ticket revenue. And over the course of a period, hopefully that's going to end in profit. If you can't do those basic things, then you're not going to survive very long. So we were looking at the commerciality of these experiences, and actually what it boiled down to was that this is always going to be a relatively premium experience, and it has to be relatively short because we have a small group of people, and therefore we need to get enough of those people through to make this viable. So on the whole, we tend to find that these experiences are around 15 minutes roughly. around 15 minutes long. I know when people like The Void came to London with the Star Wars Secrets of the Empire experience, I think that clocked in at about 11 or 12 minutes. Some of the experiences you can go and do in the States, of which, again, there's not very many of them, but they tend to run at sort of around 10 to 15 minutes. So we looked at those types of experiences and we said, well, that is not long enough to go into some deep narrative journey, and actually the other thing that we found a lot with people using VR for the very first time, which is often how they use VR in a theme park type context, is that they're so overwhelmed by the sensory experience, they're so not used to it, that they struggle to take everything in. So again, storytelling is very difficult from that perspective. So one of the things that we focused on to try and give people a very rich experience is those moments that they walk away with, that they talk about as they leave. So there's usually key scenes or key moments in the experience that are going to be memorable for you one way or another. And so what we started to do was develop a process as we were working on content for hyperreality, where we would actually lay out what are those things you really want to do? If you were able to go into a world of dinosaurs, what's the thing you really want to do? You want to be able to feed the dinosaur, you want to be able to fly on the back of one, you want to be able to do these kind of things are like your dream of what you would do in that scenario. And the same applies to virtually every topic you might cover. So it seems a slightly odd way about it. And I'm sure there's probably story purists out there who would be, turning over in their graves if they weren't with us anymore. But it's really about memories. That's what a lot of these types of experiences are about, whether it's an attraction or the same. If you go to the theatre, I have certain moments that I remember from an experience. So I don't think it should be considered kind of dirty to plan things that way. You want to hit the right notes with people. So that was always the starting point for us, was to have a table full of imagery that said, if you walk away with this and this and this, wouldn't that be fantastic? And that was how we started the whole thing. So a bit like storyboarding, but focusing on the kind of key moments rather than narrative.
Well, perhaps that mention of storyboarding is a way of taking us forwards into what you have developed then. So who wants to give a kind of top line description, and then perhaps we can actually look at some of the imagery and things to illustrate those points in the experience.
So what we've created is sort of an experiment blending opera and an operatic experience with this cutting edge technology. So the idea is to give audiences the opportunity to step into an operatic world. So it's a 15-minute hyper-reality experience. So as described, it's untethered, you can step into it, you move, it is a shared experience, so it's for an audience of 4 at the same time. And what we've done is we build a set on the stage of the Limbury Theatre at the Royal Opera House. So you will come into the theatre, go on stage and step into an installation where you get the technology and then you slowly step into the world. So for us, it was really, the challenge was to create something that felt incredibly dreamlike and really centered the audience on this musical journey, almost a poem layered by song. So the team was inspired by the liberation of Ariel at the end of the Tempest. And they really wanted to explore ideas of isolation and connection, and sort of a collective reimagination of what it means to be free. So the journey is based on that. It takes you through the stages of the night. And as the pandemic, so we started making this in June last year. And as the pandemic has unfolded, it's become more and more resonant to really ask, how do we rebuild the world? How do we use our freedom to create something that's better for all of us? This is an image of the installation. So as you can see, it's this, we almost build a theatre within a theatre. I often talk about it as an operatic TARDIS. You come into the opera house, come into the theatre, go on stage into a theatre, a hyper-reality theatre, but then you step into a world that's bigger than the stage, bigger than the opera house and bigger than London. It completely transcends what we normally think of as space. So one of the things we worked with a set designer, Joanna Scotcher, and one of the things that we first did was create some moments that we thought were really exciting, and I'll hold some of them back because everyone should come and see it. But we really thought about, one of the things the team was really excited by was the idea of movement. Because for a theatre making team, an opera team, the audience is normally static. So you transport them by the music itself. But the idea that one could feel emotion and one could feel part of the change was really inspiring. So we started making moments, as Simon described, that felt really theatrical, that felt really operatic. We started just really with almost mood board, storyboard like drawings. These are all drawings done by Joe for the show, that really started to think about change. And so this is one of the sea changes. The next step was really about then thinking about what that might look like in VR and how we could create universes that felt unnatural, operatic. So if you think about this is an idea of a city coming out of a watery ceiling, and this is what it looks like now. So you are in a sea that undulates with the music, that's responding to the music as an entire city comes from the ceiling and hits you into a new universe. We created magic doorways, portals through which the audience steps from one universe into another. And at some point, everything disintegrates. So the idea that one can go from literal to the abstract, from being together to being isolated, from a world that feels like it's occupied by people and emotion to something that's purely mathematical. Those are the kind of things that we were excited about experiencing and for the audience to experience.
I think I'd also add to that when you see some of those grabs, particularly the last one there, it actually looks relatively technical. And I think my expectations going into the project were probably a bit old-fashioned in terms of what I expected from an opera. And working with the team that we have, who were just brilliant to work with, and even up until this morning, working with them here at our studio, it's been amazing to sort of have my mind opened as to what the world of opera can be about. It was a much more contemporary approach. This was not about having an ensemble cast in strange costumes, all standing around on a stage and belting out a song. That was not what this was. This is a very different concept of opera. It was much more about exploring this kind of visual poetry, as Annette mentioned. And actually, some of the areas that the creative team wanted to explore were just not at all what we expected. So that last image was quite a technical one, but most of the scenes that you move through have more sort of physicality to them, more real world physicality, but treated in a way that is otherworldly. So there's a mix of different graphic styles in there, which was great and very challenging for the team to work on. But the most important thing of all was that it challenged what all of us expected to make. And I think that's important because for us as a commercial production company, we can never predict what we're going to work on next. And we're always given very difficult questions to answer. Usually the question is, why can't we do that? And we've absolutely been asked that several times. I heard that question this morning about one particular thing that we were trying to just tweak a little bit. And and the answer, and usually our approach as a company has always been to say, yeah, why can't we do that? Let's have a go at, let's make it. If it doesn't exist, let's make it exist. And so it was a brilliant meeting of minds from that perspective. But the challenge of being around people who just don't think inside the same box that you tend to operate in every day is incredibly valuable. So this project gave us an opportunity to really do that in spades, just this incredible challenge all the time of people looking at this project with a totally open creative mind, not restrained by expectations about what the technology should or shouldn't be able to do, just this is what we want. Let's have a go, you know.
I think that's what was exciting for us about the collaboration, is that Simon's team, everyone in it, is inherently very creative, as are our artists, in a very different way, but also in very similar ways. Like the vocabulary is very different, but actually, you know, when they talk about grading, we talk about lighting. We think in similar ways about pushing boundaries, trying to create something that sort of viscerally speaks to emotion, that moves people in something that is, you know, core to being human. And I think that was really exciting, is that both companies, so the opera company and Figment's hyperreality team, so coming together and both being really dedicated to that and bringing all kind of layers of creativity to it, both in content and in technicality. It was just such a joy to see it develop.
I think even from those glimpses of the artworks, and particularly the way the two of you talk about it, it's incredibly inspiring. It's really exciting to want to go and experience Current Rising. But there's also the pragmatic side of this, that you've been trying to do this during the pandemic. You've had 2 episodes of lockdown. So what, I presume that may have thrown up the odd challenge along the way that you hadn't anticipated.
Well, yes. However, the thing that I think Annette and I both feel about this, and again, it's very much a two-sided story in both the technical and the creative, is that the flow of the project itself, the flow of the creative thinking, the flow of the production work, the flow of the technical work that we were doing, has just, the pandemic has just been another rock in the river that we were going to have to cross anyway, you know. And I'm still slightly gobsmacked at how relevant everything has become to what we were doing, both creatively and technically, as I said. And so if I talk about the technical bit, I'm sure that Annette, who's already mentioned about some of the themes like isolation and connecting people, and how relevant that obviously is. But on the technical side, we created this specification of quite nerdy things we thought we needed in order to make it easier to create these types of unusual experiences. And we did some of them early doors because some of them were not really directly related to the work you do with the creative team. It was more to do with looking at the flow of how people move through the space and being able to do some sort of commercial planning around that kind of stuff. So that was fine, and those were the early phases of the project, whilst we were all still getting to know each other and figure out the bigger plan. But then as we started to move towards building the tool set that we thought we needed to make this content, we hit real problems with it, purely in terms of logistics. And as soon as we hit those problems, I realized these were problems we hit all the time in other areas of our work. So hyperreality is about having people physically in the same space to have a shared experience. And one of the ironic things about VR is that it's actually easier to connect people who are in physically, geographically different places. It's easier to connect them to have a shared experience than if they're in the same room. If you're in the same room with VR, it's not actually that straightforward to connect with each other and have a shared experience. So that's a big part of this. And the physical space design, that's very key as well. So you've got to be together in a special space. And then you've also got to have certain things in that space that are relevant, like the 4D effects elements that we use, like the wind and the vibration and other bits. And so the number one prerequisite is get everyone in a room. And even before the pandemic, that was a massive problem. And the reason was because Nisha, the director, was, I know at one point she was in the States working on opening an opera project out there. Joe, the designer, was in another part of the UK somewhere opening a show, and she was kind of locked into that for a few weeks. And we just couldn't get everyone together. And it actually took me back to when I remember I did a project with Darren Brown, the illusionist everyone knows from Channel 4 and Netflix. And I worked on a VR project with him in 2016, 2017. And I remember even then it was a similar issue because I would have to load up my car with a computer and VR headset, drive up the motorway to the hotel he was staying in, set it all up, preview the material to him, and then he would go off and go on stage to do his show that evening. And so even then there was this same barrier to, people, creative people, stakeholders, important people who make decisions on this kind of work are often being torn all over the place to do different things. So there was immediately this issue of not being able to get everyone in the room. So we actually started to pivot our plan for the technical tool development work towards overcoming that problem. How could we simulate being in the space together? How could we remotely connect together using what was now more widely available and more affordable hardware, like the Oculus Quest, for instance? Could we dial in, that's a bit of an old-fashioned term, but dial in Nisha from LA and Joe from Scotland or wherever she might be, and have everyone come together and collaborate? Now, I know collaboration tools are being talked about a lot at the moment. Obviously, we're doing this call on Zoom, and we are now the generation of online collaboration. But even so, even though there are VR tools for collaboration, what we need is very different. We need to be able to review work. We need to be able to take very high-end graphics work, because we're running the HP ZVR backpacks for our experience. But can someone with an Oculus Quest in a hotel in LA see that work that's designed for these very high-end workstations? So we started to create tools that would allow us to do all of that and use that in collaboration. Now, the nature of these projects is it's chicken and egg. We couldn't do the tools and wait to make the production. So several of those tools are still being finished at the moment, but the production shone a light on just how important they were. And actually, they've led on to some very interesting commercial conversations where we hope to be able to use that system in future. And I feel it's already giving us a competitive advantage to be able to talk to clients in other parts of the world about how we can overcome that geographical separation, and as a UK creative company, still deliver these types of projects and use the tool set that is the product of this project. So even pre-lockdown, pre-pandemic, this was already a thing, and so it just fitted perfectly as the pandemic hit.
So that's an incredibly positive spin. I mean, I think the pandemic has driven a lot. There are others, I'm sure, across beyond. We'll hear other stories of where the pandemic's caused people to be very innovative, to trying to use it as a challenge and accelerate changes that perhaps would have happened anyway, but perhaps more slowly. And now I'm wondering if, just thinking from the audience and side of this, bringing people together for a shared VR experience in the circumstances, there must have been problems that you can't see in quite such a positive light you've had to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, as Simon says, I think what was really exciting about the project is that it was answering a lot of new questions, so it could just adapt the questions it was answering. But it's been hard, and some of the ambitions of the project have shifted just because the world has shifted. So positively, we found new ways of collaborating. And there was a really close collaboration between the composer and a soprano, for example, because they were locked down. So normally the composer would do a lot of work, have a rehearsal, maybe do some more work, and then it would be recorded, where now they could touch in and have sort of sessions during the composing process, which is really exciting because it allowed for a different creative process that enriched it rather than taking it back. But simultaneously on our side, some of the ambitions that we wanted to do, we will not be able to do because of the pandemic. So one of the things that I was really excited about, we were really looking at building this TARDIS theatre somewhere out in the world. So we were quite far ahead in placing it in the King's Cross area, away from the Opera House. And the idea that we could make a show, that this technology allowed us to pop up an operatic universe somewhere that wasn't within the four walls of Covent Garden, was really exciting. And that's something that had to fall by the wayside because of the pandemic, because of that sort of level of logistics. And it's beautiful. I'm very proud of what we made, but it's an R&D project as well in many levels. We have, invented it as we went along. So now but it's taken a new form. It's now a way to program something on the Limbury stage when we cannot fill the theatre with the hundreds of people we'd normally put in there. Now we can have something for an audience of 4 that makes economic sense to do so. Originally, we really wanted to do a multi-stage experience. So imagine that there are a group of 4 going in, and then another group of 4 going in another stage, and we were really playing around with throughput. I learned a lot about throughput and audience throughput from Figment, which is really exciting. So all of that has been scaled back because health and safety is the most important thing now. We want to give a safe experience that is cleaned in between every visit. We want to make sure there's more than enough distance between our audiences. So some of the things we've had to scale back, and we hope to do it in the future. I think we'd be really excited. It's still built to be able to do that. So it's still possible to take this show when the pandemic has come down, or vaccines might be there, to take it to different locations, build multiple stages, because all the materials are there to let opera pop up wherever it is wanted. And so scaled back for now, but we build in the possibility of doing it later.
I think it's also worth saying about that it's quite a switch from when we started the project. Obviously, the Opera House was filling up with, I don't know what the capacity is, but hundreds, and I assume within any theatres, hundreds or 1,000. And that was happening virtually every night. And our little project was something that would be happening almost like a pop-up thing. Right now, where we stand in November, nearly December 2020, what we have is currently the only thing that can run within that space because of the restrictions of the pandemic, because of being safe, being COVID safe. Suddenly we have something that does allow people to go to the Opera House and experience an opera, a form of opera, which without this technology, without this type of project, they wouldn't be able to do yet. And that's massive. And I think it's really empowering to the spirit of trying to figure out ways that we can all keep the economy moving, keep the world moving, still have enriching cultural experiences. It's fantastic that the technology affords us an opportunity to do that when the traditional ways can't function at the moment.
And I think that's what's been really great, right? This is an innovation project, so it could innovate itself during its innovation process, which makes it nimble, which makes it responsive to what's going on in the world, in a way that traditional art forms, they have needs, very specific needs. It's taken hundreds of years to build it so that it works its best, where this work can shape shift and change in the face of what the world wants and what the world needs.
Fantastic. I think what you set out is a great invitation to everybody to want to see Current Rising, for the experience to step into this visual, operatic TARDIS. I'm sure that's going to be a phrase that everybody's going to go away with. We're going to do a live Q&A immediately after this. And we are at Beyond, so we're 2 weeks before your opening night, roughly. Still in heading for
the 17th of December.
Yeah. So I think the only thing now is to wish you good luck with that. Everybody to come back for the Q&A that we're going to do in a few minutes. And now we'll leave you with the trailer for Current Rising so you get a feel of the experience itself. Thanks very much to Simon Revley from Figment and Annette Mace from the Royal Opera House.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Tonight we're going to talk about the aspect of the weather that tends to affect the lifestyle of coastal gardeners the most.
Start with your feet, earth king, in the standing, the waiting, the walking, in this complete endless sea-washed pause, in the standing, let us wait at the coast of the day.
Hi there, everyone. Hopefully you've made it safely over from the main stage to this Q&A. So Q&A around our deep dive into current rising. So I'm here, I'm Andrew Chitty. You've just seen me talking to my two guests here. Annette Mace from the Royal Opera House, Head of Audience Labs, and Simon Reveley from Figment Productions. So I'm just going to close down the window that is rather distractingly showing me about half a second out of sync. So we've got a fair few questions. It seemed like everybody, for looking at the chat, everybody seemed incredibly enthusiastic about Current Rising, which is good. Incredibly keen to see it, which of course I am myself, as I said to Annette and Simon. And I believe, actually, do you want to give us an update? Because you were saying that you've just done a walkthrough today. So we're what, 2 weeks away from go live. So where are you at the moment?
Shall I?
Go ahead, Annette.
So this morning was our first official tech session, what we call it in theatre. And we've been, so we did a walkthrough from beginning to end, final note sessions. It's really interesting in its own right that we're reinventing what tech looks like, because some things can change and some things can't change in a very different way. So we have a sort of distributed tech sessions. And this morning, Simon and I were in the Opera House. Simon is still there, and saw it all come together properly for the first time. It feels really exciting.
Fantastic. Should we go? Well, let's go on with some of the questions that came up in the session just previously when we were talking about the project. And if anybody's got any more questions, do keep them coming in, and I am hoping that they will be pushed through to me in our chat box. The first question, actually, from Damien Smith. So Damien Smith, ISO Design. Good. Hopefully Damien's followed across from the main stage. Will Hyphen, so that's your set of tools, Simon. Will Hyphen remain a Figment tool, or will you be making it more freely available for others to orchestrate work with?
We'd certainly love to open it up for others. The original aim was certainly that we end up with a set of tools that help to create these multi-user, multi-sensory experiences in VR. And so, yes, the long-term aim is certainly for that. I think because the nature of this work is still relatively specialized, there's not a massive market out there for it. So it's much more likely that we will get connected with people and have conversations about how we might be able to help them. It's unlikely to ever be a mass market tool because there isn't a mass market for it to reach at the moment. But we'd be very happy to use it either in collaboration with others or after having a chat. So yeah, we're not going to keep it to ourselves.
Right, I think that'd be, yeah, I can imagine you and Damien would have lots to talk about.
I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Some similar interests, if you don't know each other already, some similar interests, but also very, very different ones as well. Agnieszka has asked, and I think it's an interesting question. So you've got a combination here of art and technology, and it's co-created between, you know, the kind of artists and the technological side. But where was the audience, sense of the audience in here? Was audience part of the co-creation as well?
So, I mean, it's made to be in it. So in that sense, the audience is always in our mind, and we're really trying to create an experiential thing. So audience experience has been very much at the forefront. When we started the project, we were hoping to do much more intensive audience testing, but we've made this during a pandemic, so no. So as a team,
was that problematic in any way then?
No, I mean, barely noticeable. So as a team, I think we talked a lot about audience experience, and for us, that was part of the excitement of it, to create something that the audience could step into and really think about audience journey as part of the creative process, and moments, theatrical moments, and how it would feel to an audience, how they would relate to each other. So when you're in this universe, you can see each other. So all of that was really important in the creative process, but the audience testing pandemic discuss?
Yeah, and I think it was interesting today doing the tech run through, and just very quickly as well, I am in a dressing room at the Royal Opera House right now, although it doesn't look like it because I'm sort of on the set from some of our content. But if you hear a voice come over the tannoy telling us to get into rehearsals, then please ignore it. But yeah, we've been in the Opera House today doing a tech run through with the whole team, but all in masks, all socially distanced, even giving notes at the end of a session where we were having to make sure we were all standing far enough apart. The cleaning's been relentless, and it's just a completely different experience to what we expected when we started this project nearly 2 years ago. And we've definitely, unfortunately, had to miss a lot of the audience testing that was a key part of the plan all the way through. I think there's a couple of places where that's interesting. One is just the physical experience of coming along and going through Current Rising with VR, with backpacks and headsets and everything else that we're going to use. So that's one angle where we would have loved to have had more opportunity to bring in people who were fresh to the experience. But I think the other angle on it from an audience perspective is the nature of the experience itself once you're inside hyperreality, once you've got your headset on and you're in the experience. And I have to say that even for us, and we've done more VR than most people on the planet, probably because of all the project work we've done in that space. But it was a completely new experience for us to be doing this with an opera team, with the aesthetics, with the music, with the sense of what makes a short form opera like this, and how we go about describing it, how we go about setting expectations. That's something that we'll only start to figure out the audience response to that once the doors are open and they're coming in, which is going to be very interesting indeed. But it was, that was a really new experience for us. And so we kind of were the audience to some extent, even though we were making this thing. Just the expectations, the format is so different from everything else we've done before.
I love that.
And I guess that's also, it's that thing that we've got so used to people talking about different forms of co-creation that actually we don't always have to have the audience present to create things to delight audiences. I mean, I think, Simon, you were talking earlier on about the experience you've had of beats and moments in a story that you learned from your work with, theme parks. So that's, in a way, that's kind of distilled audience experience, isn't it? That's how you've experimentally tried and found these things work. So I guess,
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I was listening to something in the last couple of days. It was something to do with a neurological study about memory, and it was stressing the point that nearly all of us do tend to remember a whole scene, the sense, the smells, the sounds, the vision. But we remember a moment. We don't necessarily remember the things that threaded various moments together. And as we were looking at this, we were thinking, well, this is exactly how we've always approached VR experiences. There's so much to take in. You've always got this challenge of trying to tell story in VR, where so many of the tools we've all grown up with professionally to do with editing, lighting, acting talent, direction, mise-en-scène, composition, all of that stuff goes out the window because you can no longer control the eyeballs of the participants of the audience. So a lot of the rules get ripped up, and so at that point you begin to question whether narrative is really a suitable thing to deal with within VR. And actually, the nature of a project like Current Rising fits remarkably well. And I'd love to say it was planned from the beginning, but Annette described it as, here we go, there's a tannoy for you, just to prove I'm in the dressing room. And Annette described this as more like a poem than a film or a theatre performance or anything else. And I think that sums up that you go through the experience and take away memorable moments. And I think that's a really interesting point within immersive entertainment in general, is those moments that soak in, and as you walk away, you carry them with you. I think that is something that more people could recognize in creating these types of experiences for people.
Annette, this question come in from Kate Geddes. which is interesting, I think, which is so with these new ways of working, what kind of skill sets are going to be needed in the future to sustain that in, you know, in the sector, say in, you know, in the performance sector or in opera?
I mean, wide and diverse. I think when I put a team together for these things, there are a couple of things that I look for in artists. So I think you have to be a collaborative worker. There are amazing writers that are not natural collaborators, and there are writers who are collaborators. And I think if you're finding a new form, you have to have a team that are natural collaborators, because it's the only way to do it. These things have to grow up together. The old school primacy of one creative discipline over another is just not how this works. I think the other thing is openness and curiosity, which sounds very naturally present, but there's a lot of people who want to do things as they've always done them, and there are people that are excited by really pushing what's possible. So, you know, if I look at the creative team on this, I think using Joe Scotcher, who's the theatrical set designer who worked on this, has just really embraced what is possible with CGI and really pushed her practice into a new realm. And I think that's really important. And then I think the third thing is actually what Agnieszka was talking about, people that are interested in audience experience over just authorial voice. I think both need to be present. You need to make something that has something to say. But I think, especially in this space, really thinking about how the audience experiences it and being interested in that, I think is very vital. And then finally, I think we're really, when we're creating something like this, we're really thinking about the business model as well. Like how can this exist in the world? So just having a sympathy to that from a creative team, I think is important. So those would be the four things I would pick up from my side. Simon, from your side, I'm sure there's.
Well, I have to say, I'm kind of more interested in your side in terms of the fact that working with Joe and Nisha and Sam, the composer, and other members of the team, it's been such an eye-opening experience. And the absolute best feature of that is the fact that Nisha and Joe have just been incredibly open to the fact that they are working with a new set of tools, with a new set of restrictions. Neither of them have worked. They've both worked with interesting things like video projection within theatre before. They've not worked directly with a sort of a CGI-based environment before. And their openness to compromise in taking an original vision and allowing that to be reformulated as we start to show work and show options and say, well, you might not be able to do that, but we could do this. That openness, I think, is so essential, because we've certainly been on projects in the past with commercial clients where they have such a concrete and rigid view of what they want to achieve, and the technology isn't always there to give them that. And I think flexibility in expectation is absolutely crucial, particularly at this stage in the development of the industry.
Okay, here's another one that's come in, which is from Arna Nostis Srinek, which is a really interesting one, and maybe it's an observation on the last couple of days. Why is the Tempest the go-to text, apparently, for creative and immersive R&D?
Wow, I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I can do a 5-hour essay on it. But I think the Tempest, in essence, is a piece about change and shift and magic. It's about transformation, and it's about the nature of art. So I think when we as theatre makers look at the magic of technology and the transformation of what art can look like, I think it's sort of an vortex in that way. I can talk about this much longer, but that's the short version.
How early in the whole process was it right in your mind from the get-go in it?
No. So we started without a narrative. I think we talked about it before, so we didn't watch it back, because we were really interested in introducing the teams together and letting this thing grow up. I think the thing that we were interested in from the beginning was transformation and change as a thing, isolation and togetherness, because that feels like VR and hyperreality and the jump that makes, and what theatre is about, is shared experience, felt very prevalent. And actually, I think Ariel showed up, I would go halfway through the process. We went through, what I'm trying to remember, we had we had poetry very early on, from female writers talking about identity and shift and change. And Ariel came up through.
It's important though to also say that it's very much a jumping off point, the idea of Ariel and what happened next with Ariel at the end of the Tempest. It was a jumping off point. You know, this is not the story of Ariel. This is not the story of the Tempest. That was simply a sort of a creative launching off point. And I think people would have to know the Tempest pretty well and understand the character of Ariel pretty well to be able to make those connections. You know, it was more of a sort of fuel for inspiration than anything else, I think.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was a half humorous comment, to be honest, because I think it is because the Tempest is so has all those qualities that Annette's listed. It's a touch point for so much, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so Rob Eagle is asking, can you talk a bit more about the moment? How do you structure the narrative arc so that emotional beats work across the dramaturgy, music, and the technology?
Do you want to talk about that? How you normally work, Simon? Because I think that was partly his jumping off point for this.
Yeah. Well, I think we introduced the idea early on because we'd been tackling narrative in VR for a few years, and we'd done a couple of projects where we'd worked with people who had a background in film and TV, who were very adamant that they wanted to hold on to that narrative strongly throughout the experience. Obviously, it's the format most people are used to working with. But for all the reasons that most people know, and I mentioned earlier, it's not always easy to be able to maintain or deliver a narrative that way. And we certainly saw from the experience of running thousands and thousands of people through VR that the things they remembered were never the story. It was always the more visceral, emotional, sensory side of it. So we started to, formulate a way of working where we would take cue cards. Hopefully you can hear me. We would take cue cards of moments we wanted people to take away with them. So when we've done more sort of traditional pieces, for instance, there's a dinosaur piece we did, and we kind of got everyone in a room and said, what's the thing you would definitely want to do if you were in a world of dinosaurs? You'd want to fly on the back of one, you'd want to feed one, there's all these kind of magical moments that if you were building a Disney world for this experience, you would want to give people those moments. And so we literally made cue cards with each of those moments on, and we had a bit of a narrative in mind, but then we would make the narrative flow around those crucial moments. And so we talked the team on the Current Rising through that approach. And that definitely influenced how some of those early conversations found leaping off points from poems, from Ariel in the Tempest, from lots of other ideas. And they started to form these individual scenes and individual moments for the flow of the piece. And those then began to take on this amazing resonance emotionally, that each scene had a purpose to create an emotional response for people. And that was the primary driver, I think. Is that fair to say, Anna?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's useful to say is that we didn't design 6 moments and then strung them together. We designed, we looked at 50 moments, of which 7 made it in. And those moments are also now hidden in the narrative. It's just for our point of view, it was really interesting to start with, what about hyperreality feels operatic? Where do we feel emotion lies, so that we could build a dramaturgical structure that leaned into what was possible and didn't start from a more traditional point of view. But we then did take a step back from this moment approach and really sort of apply sort of good old-fashioned dramaturgy to it again. So I think it's that back and forth between leaning into the possibility, but then also getting rid of lots of things so that you can get to an arc that has an emotional resonance, like opera.
Rob's got a follow-up question. I think this is from Rob. What are your expectations in terms of the mix of the audience for Current Rising? Do you have any expectations?
So what, I mean, we don't know, but what we're hoping for is that mix. So we're working with Royal Holloway on and Story Futures on a research piece on this, on the audience, and we specifically want to talk to people who have experienced opera, but not necessarily VR, and virtually no one has done hyperreality, so at least some, but never done VR, vice versa, people who've done VR but never have seen an opera, people who've done both and people who've done neither. Because what we're really interested in is, who does it speak to? Does it speak to all of those groups? Does it speak more to one group? Who's feeling all the feels, and how does this land? So for us, it's something we're really excited by discovering. We're working on sort of spreading the story well beyond opera land in a weird way. That's sort of, you know, they'll come anyway. We're giving some tickets to the Black Tickets Project. We're really interested in young, diverse audiences coming to see it and sort of go, this is opera, what do you think? So for us, that's a question and something we're excited about more than that we know. This is audience of the future, creative R&D. We're learning for all of us.
Okay, a question here from George Plug. How big was the development team on this brilliant new VR show, and who was involved? And then a supplementary, different question, so don't forget that one. But then, and do you think that real life theatre, live events are going to come back strong and are still going to be the main focus for big theatre and production teams? So first of all, production team.
Well, on our side at Figment, we, over the course of the project, we've had a almost purely technical team that are working on the tool set, which was sort of the starting point for the project technically. And that team's, over the last 18 months or so, has probably been around 10 people on and off, maybe 10 to 15 people on and off. You know, at the moment, as a company, we're about 25 permanent staff, and most of that team has been involved at some point in the project. But we've been building a tool set in parallel with building the experience itself, which has then influenced the tools, and in most cases made us rip them up and start again to find out what we really needed as opposed to what we thought we needed. So yeah, on our side, I would say there's been a core team of sort of 10 to 15 people and a broader team of about 25. But I would also say that the experience itself is a 15-minute experience. So this is not a 3-hour opera. This is a shorter form experience, which I think is necessary for a number of reasons. But if it was going to be a much bigger experience, I would imagine a much larger production team than that.
From our side, it's a small opera team. So think theatre, librettist / writer, director, designer, lighting designer, sound designer, and then a small orchestra to work with the beautiful chroma, to have a really small orchestra to record, some 3-dimensional recording specialists, but in essence, sort of not a million miles away from just who you'd hire to make a small scale opera or a average theatre show.
Okay, we'll pause the second part of George's question, actually, because I'm sure we'll come back to that at the end. But another question coming from Uster Amundsen, who certainly you may or may not know. Really interesting, following up on the point about the Tempest, and I think, Simon, this is something that I think you've thought about IPs, is how important do you think it is for projects like this that push formal boundaries to use stories and that audiences are already familiar with? I mean, if you think in other people's terms, you might term that IP, you know, Shakespeare's quite big as an IP, although given you said it isn't really the Tempest. Yeah. But could this work with entirely new stories, or do you think this is an entirely new story? So that's that balance of I guess this is asking, if you want to push the form, does it help to take people there with something that's familiar?
I think.
So
I
games
think
have always done this, haven't they? You know, I mean,
yeah.
I would say to a crazy degree now.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Before we came on air together, we were talking about IP, and in my world of working in theme parks and visitor attractions, IP just means any recognisable sort of entertainment brand, as it were. For instance, I'm working on a project at the moment with Black Mirror for the Channel 4 Netflix series, and we've done a lot of work with Lego, and so those would all be counted as IPs. And I think there was a lot of talk in the early days of VR becoming a location-based business proposition. There was a lot of talk within the VR industry that it needed an IP in order to attract people. So it needed Transformers or Avengers or whatever the thing might be, in order to sell tickets, in order to draw people in. You know, most people reference Star Wars and the Void that came to Westfield. And so there was always this attitude, as there is with a lot of forms of entertainment, that you need a big name associated with something in order to draw people in. And to a certain degree, there's some truth in that. But I think we were discussing beforehand that actually an IP doesn't have to be a movie brand or anything. And in the UK arts and culture sector, there's IP there waiting to be developed that can be associated with a certain artist or director or composer or musician or whatever it might be. And, you know, in our case, we've been really lucky to partner with the Royal Opera House on this and their creative team, each of whom comes with their own form of IP as well. And so I think that the importance in it is more around the commercial aspect and making a business of this so that we can all earn a living in this industry, making hopefully better and better art and better entertainment. If we can't get audiences through the door buying tickets, then obviously we don't have a business to pursue. So that's a really crucial aspect of it. And I think that's more important than the actual audience experience itself. Because once you're in, and it's such a visceral and emotional experience that I think that at that point the IP becomes secondary. But it's certainly, to Annette's point, we have to look at it from a business modeling perspective as well as an art or entertainment or technology perspective, and that's where I think IP is crucial.
But I think both arguments are there. I think famous things attract people, whether it's a star in it or a famous story or something we already know and love. So that's the upside of existing IP. But I think that you can also, and I think it's important to also argue the other side, where if you have that IP, you have to have that IP with quite a lot of freedom, because actually traditional IP doesn't necessarily translate super neatly into a new medium. So I think what was exciting about this project is that, in a weird way, as Simon says, the Royal Opera House and the creative team and like the fact that we're making it is part of its IP, but it allowed us the freedom to make something that's made for the medium it is. This is a hyper reality thing. This is to be experienced in this space. And I think sometimes it becomes really complicated with existing IP if the IP owners don't give the creatives making this work enough freedom to actually transform it into something that works on this new platform and on these new spaces. That can become problematic in its own right.
And I would say that's also one of the biggest downsides with working with any form of IP, is if they don't have that flexibility, it can make it an incredibly expensive process to actually create the content. You know, I often tell a story about a particular project we did some years ago with one of the biggest IPs in the world. And we had a 12-week review cycle on that, because there was 5 different stakeholder groups who had to look at every single change we made to the content we were working on. And that immediately makes the whole thing cost more, the budget goes up, the time it takes goes up, and, you know, and it can make for a very difficult production process. So to Annette's point, I think, particularly with new technology, new innovations, you need to have flexibility all round. You can't be working with someone who's so protective over what that IP or brand represents that they can't budge on or make any compromises at all on how they expect this thing to look or sound or the story. Freedom's essential to be able to explore these new forms, I think.
And I guess that's interesting to Austin's point about stories, is that older stories are more flexible in that way. They don't have IP courts to come and tell you that you can't accept your piece, the thing you're proposing, into their canon. But I think also you're making a very interesting point that the trust in you know, a house like the Royal Opera House, the kind of brand equity is the important thing there. That we kind of trust people so to entertain us and take us into new media and new experiences. So yeah, I think there's a lot of subtlety there, because I think there's some I think sometimes, and I think we did this in Audience of the Future when we said at the start, right, the demonstrators we were going to fund, you must have an existing IP, because we don't want you to waste all the money trying to create new characters and stories. But I think it's turned out to be much more subtle and balanced than that, and I think that's what you're saying. Got an interesting one. So there's several people in the chat thinking about not only where can you see this. Obviously, you've got your run coming up, and do restate that again. But will there be a way of seeing this outside the UK? And Damien Smith again saying, once the run of the show is complete, will you make it available as a VR only release, or is it important to you that it always remains a physical, hyper-real, location-based experience?
Do you want to go, or shall I?
You should go first on that.
So I think as a framing device, again, this is an R&D project funded by Audience of the Future. So part of this is what we're finding out.
Don't bring us into it.
No, but we've asked that question. That it was part of the question when we started creating is how does this live in the world? Where can it go? I think we have made it so that it can tour, and we would love to do that. But also we're trying to figure out. Only during the making of it, because it didn't exist before, there wasn't something to model it on. So we, for example, looked at touring exhibitions, small-scale touring exhibitions, and that model, installations, how theatre tours, and how we sort of combine all those models into something that will look like something we could do. So we've made it so it can. We're very busy trying to get it up during a pandemic, so that's sort of the next question. So for Simon and I, this project runs to the end of March. So as soon as this show is up, we'll be sitting down with a lot of these questions. I think we're interested in the VR at home space, but we also are aware that we've created something that is incredibly visceral and is created for a shared experience. So we're yet to see if it is beautiful and exciting in your own home or not. So we'll be experimenting with that, but it's very much, again, we're learning for all of us. We're trying to answer these questions as part of the process.
And I would add to that I think the nature of location-based experiences is so fundamentally different to home entertainment, particularly when you add, in this case, the opera element to it. I mean, when people come to Current Rising, I'm motioning that way because the theatre's that way for me, where I'm sitting right now. But they're going to walk into this beautiful theatre space at the Opera House, and we have a stage, a particular set built there, which houses the experience. And I think a huge part of how people are going to feel about this is down to that location and down to arriving here and going through what is a theatrical experience before you even put a headset on. And I think the context of that really helps with the content, because the content is an opera. It's a very poetic form, and I really don't know whether that will work at home. I think that in the context of the Opera House, it works really well. But going back to the audience question earlier, I'm much more relaxed about an opera audience seeing this piece than I am about a technology audience seeing this piece, because I think the expectations are going to be so completely different between the two. And I think that the technology audience, who might well be the ones asking to have a version at home, are going to be the ones who probably find a bigger challenge in this from a sort of an arts perspective. So I guess it's a question of, is it the right type of content to experience at home? I'm not sure it is.
I think that this is like fundamentally part of the question, right? And like I think we've made something beautiful. Do come and see it. But also, like, what's the market like? What's the market for a 15-minute at-home opera experience, which would be better if you were there? Maybe it's big enough. Maybe it's just not big enough for us to invest in the adjustments we'd have to make to the work to deliver it via that network.
So that makes me think, because we've only got a few minutes left, so anybody who wants to ask one final question, do please come in. But it makes me think, it's been such an extraordinary year. You've produced this amazing thing, which we're all going to hope, well, some of us, hopefully, some people are going to see in a couple of weeks' time. But it's been a year when we haven't had audiences. And normally the way we get recognition for this is, for great and innovative shows, is awards and things like that. And I was thinking, we've got BAFTA screeners last night. They're all films we've seen. They've all been streaming, it's kind of, so how are we going to, right across today, we've heard lots of projects that have done amazing things. How do you think we get recognition for them? Do we need, is the next, do we need awards to recognise things like Current Rising and what an extraordinary year it's been?
I mean, I love a good award. I think what's really interesting is a slight, is that question in a sort of wider context. I feel like in the UK and in different places as well, but I know the UK well, and I think there is so much interesting work going on in this culture crossover with technology space. And I feel like where we've moved from maybe a decade ago, it was much more fragmentary and one-offy. It feels like an ecology is emerging, and a critical dialogue around that, which includes prizes and which bring audiences in, but also like great journalism around it, would all be, I think, would all help all of us making this work think differently and become a sector in rather than, I think 10 years ago, digital was an add-on. Now there is a slow transition happening, but I feel like we're, early, it still feels like early days. So yes, awards, yes, journalists.
Yeah, maybe, Timon, it is some kind of celebration as part of its own field rather than an add-on to the technology field or different bits of entertainment, or whatever.
Yeah, I certainly think if someone comes up with an award that's got a category of best hyper-reality experience at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, at least I'd feel fairly confident that we might win that.
I'd be disappointed if it didn't win its drum.
I'm bang up for entry in that category. But yeah, I think the categorization is the question, because there's not many people who get to do this kind of stuff, really. And, there's not a lot of it out there to be compared against. And obviously that's not always what matters, but certainly recognition matters for everybody, so that we get to do more of this. And it is only that. It's the same in the commercial world, really. Those awards only really matter if they help you get attention to win the next project, and therefore keep being viable in a world that's increasingly difficult to survive in.
Okay, well, perhaps that's where I'll leave it, and that's perhaps something we should consider through the last couple of days of Beyond, is actually how do we do that celebration and recognition and play some part in that as we roll into next year. But thanks everybody for some fantastic questions. I know, looking at the names who've been in this session, it's a really, really engaged area of the audience. And thanks very much to Annette Mason, Royal Opera House, Simon Reveley from Figment Productions for allowing us in under the hood of Current Rising. And December the 17th?
So it's open. The tickets go on sale this Friday, so be there. And it opens to the public on the 19th of December.
Okay, lovely. Form an orderly queue on Friday then. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.